just so I have it with the footage, can you just say and spell your name for me?
Sarah Martin, Sarahmartin.
So, Sarah, just describe for me what you do here. Give me a brief intro into yourself and what you do here at this preserve.
Sure. I am the South Florida Land Conservation Coordinator, and I'm based out of Blowing Rocks Preserve. I'm nested in the South Florida program, which is part of the Stewardship and Fields Initiatives Department of the Florida chapter of the Nature Conservancy.
Can you tell me a little about where we are right now and just describe this preserve to me?
Blowing Rocks Preserve is a very special place. It's a 73-acre nature preserve that's owned and managed by the Nature Conservancy. It was donated by island residents in 1969 who recognized how special this place is for its unique Anastasia limestone rock ridge feature, as well as its lush coastal scenery and sea turtle nesting.
What are some of the other things that make this place really special? Yeah, I'm thinking like also in terms of like the context of Florida and like the surrounding neighborhoods in general. I feel like this is prime real estate, right?
Absolutely. So if this area was not protected back in 1969, it surely would have been more homes, more private homes or condos, and it would not have been accessible to the public. The community wouldn't be able to come and appreciate the beautiful rock ridge out there or this wild oasis of natural beauty. So by donating it to the Nature Conservancy, it made it, and by putting an education center here, and trails and boardwalks, it's more accessible to the public.
How does this area compare to other beaches, shorefront properties in Florida? I feel like this is unique.
It's absolutely unique, partly in because of the Anastasia limestone rock ridge, which is the largest outcropping of Anastasia limestone in Florida. It is a sandy, somewhat coquina-like formation that has fossils in it. It's one of the rock ridge outcroppings where you can actually see large fossils within the outcropping itself. And it is also, because of where we are latitudinally, we are in the subtropics. So a lot of temperate species that come from the north are making their way down to the southern edge of their range here in Martin County, and then a lot of tropical species from the south are making their way up to hit their northern range here, so we get this interesting matrix of species.
So talk to me about some of the landscape restoration that's gone in, touching on what's behind you and what we would have seen 50 years ago.
Absolutely. So this place, if you would have come here hundreds of years ago, would have looked ecologically similar to how it is today. There are distinct native habitats such as coastal strand and coastal scrub.
Wait for this,
thunder.
Yeah, that thing just was rolling.
That plane to go over.
Yeah, I know, it's going to sound like an airplane.
So start with what it looked like then and what it looked like today.
Okay.
Yeah. I think
Tell me
it's
when.
gone. Yeah, go ahead. Let's try it again.
Okay. So if you would have come to this place hundreds of years ago, you would have come to a pristine coastal barrier island that has natural habitats that are much like what you'll see here today. We've got coastal strand and coastal scrub, which are somewhat globally imperiled in Florida, imperiled ecosystems, and we've got coastal mangrove forests and swamps and coastal wetlands. We also have beach dune habitat along the ocean shoreline, and we've got tropical maritime hammocks, which are ocean hammocks that have big ancient subtropical trees growing in them. So that's what you would have seen if you would have come here hundreds of years ago. And the island residents, the early island residents that come to know this place, they recognized how beautiful it was. But because of a lot of man-made activities, so dredging of the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway and the permanent opening of the Jupiter Inlet, construction of roads and spoil deposition from that dredging really impacted our wetlands and some of our natural systems. So by the time it was the 1980s, this place was looking a lot different than it did back a couple hundred years ago. So the biologists for the Nature Conservancy back in the 1980s recognized that this place was becoming damaged by these changes. And there was a need to do something called restoration, which is to correct a lot of those impacts that happened to this place and to restore those natural systems back to what they originally were. And in the 1980s, that was a kind of a cutting edge idea. And it wasn't just here at Blowing Rocks, it was everywhere where humans have made impacts to natural systems. The concept of reducing those impacts and returning these habitats back to what they naturally were was really becoming quite popular at the time.
Has this been a model for other restoration projects around the world or even at TNC?
Absolutely. So just here locally even, I know a lot of the public lands that have done restoration have come here to talk with our experts and to learn more about the restoration techniques that were used and how to do restoration of these systems, especially locally in our county and in our area, because it was so new at the time. And a lot of the restorations that you'll see locally around here are modeled after what was done at Blowing Rocks.
Oh, that's awesome. Talk to me about some of the things that you would have seen when this was in an incorrect stage about 50 years ago. I'm thinking like Australian pine, anything else like that.
Absolutely. So the impacts that happened here due to spoil deposition from the dredging of the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway impacted our wetlands. So tidal creeks and tidal flow was impacted, and salt water could not move where it needed to go. And the construction of roads put a lot of fill and other things along, and these disturbances caused by humans really created the perfect environment for something we call invasive species. So for us locally, some of those invasive species included trees called Australian pines, another tree shrub called Brazilian pepper, and another one that's called latherleaf. There were other ones, but those were the really three main species that came in and began to alter these native habitats. Sorry.
Just wait a sec.
Thunder.
It sounds epic in these headphones. I don't know how it sounds to you guys. Can you just redo the ending of that really quick?
Yeah, what was I saying?
Yeah, Brazilian.
Okay.
Brazilian.
Some of the invasive species that recruited into these disturbed areas on the preserve included for us Australian pines, which are very large trees, a shrubby invasive called Brazilian pepper, and another shrub called latherleaf. Those are the three main culprits that came in and really began to change and impact the natural systems here ecologically and began to decrease our biodiversity. So species that naturally were part of the community here no longer were able to compete with these invasive species, and there were a lot of species that reduced in their population sizes. And so if you would have come here in the 1980s, this place would have looked very different. The whole landscape was completely covered in these invasive trees. It would have been difficult to find our mangrove forests or our coastal strand and scrub or even some of our maritime hammock habitat. And so what we did, do you want me to get into the restoration?
You can get to the restoration.
Okay. The idea of doing a community-based restoration was very important for TNC. So rather than just hiring somebody to go out and do the work quickly and to get it done and just be done with it, the Nature Conservancy worked on community-based restoration, which is pulling people from the community, volunteers, experts in horticulture, and bringing them to this place before there were even any buildings to work on the property. And they began a native plant nursery where they would collect seeds from some of our native trees here and some of our grasses and wildflowers. And they would use their horticultural knowledge to propagate those plants and grow them and grow them and grow them. So we had thousands and thousands of plants to put back out into the landscape. So that was a really big component of that. The other component was removing those invasive species, which was a lot of heavy duty work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into that. And then getting people out to do the fun part, which is planting those things back out into the landscape. So it really went through phases. By the 90s, if you came here, you probably would have seen some areas that looked like moonscapes where invasives had just been completely cleared and they had to start from square one. And then they also did something to correct a lot of the hydrology. So in the 1990s, they developed a conceptual restoration plan with the South Florida Water Management District to correct hydrology conditions here, because you can do a lot of planting and invasive plant removal, but if the hydrology is not corrected, these systems are never going to behave the way that they should.
What's hydrology in layman's terms?
Hydrology is really just the flow of water. So we are a barrier island, and we have the Indian River Lagoon to our west, and it's tidal. And we have the Atlantic Ocean on our east. And so it's really the way that water moves on this preserve. So when the tide comes up, these mangrove forests will be inundated by water. And when the tide goes out, they may be completely dry. And as the tide changes, different species take advantage of those conditions. You might come out here and see little spawning fish swimming around at a high tide, and egrets and herons out looking for dinner. And then when it's very dry, you might see the fiddler crabs and the mangrove crabs scuttling around the mangrove roots and propagules.
So restoring this place in a way helps a much larger ecosystem too. It's not just this specific place. It helps the animals that live within this system, right?
Absolutely. It's a sanctuary for wildlife. And so different species depend on this place. Some of them are local year-round residents, and then others, like our shorebirds and our sea turtles, come here seasonally, and they depend on this place to be intact and to have a biodiverse matrix of species here for them to feed on and for them to forage and places for them to nest. And so allowing this place to be what it needs to be for wildlife makes it a sanctuary.
Let's talk about the popularity of this place. This is arguably TNC's most popular preserve. Can we talk about that?
Absolutely. People do love this place. We're in South Florida. We're really at the entryway of South Florida here at Blowing Rocks Preserve. So if you drive just a little bit to the north, it's a little bit less populated. Thunder.
It'll start right at the beginning of the popularity.
Yeah.
Okay.
How's everything look?
It looks great.
Am I doing all right?
You're doing
okay.
excellent. You're very good
I'm
at
just
this.
like, don't feel good, so I hope I'm making sense.
You are very knowledgeable.
You're
She
very
was
Okay.
good.
the speaker at the lecture. She was fabulous.
Cool.
I
Okay.
heard that you were awesome
Oh,
yesterday.
thank you very much, you guys. Sick, awesome. I was wondering, I was feeling kind of lightheaded yesterday. Anyway,
Let me pause recording
So-
really quick so I can fry. Okay.
you guys have a cool job.
Yeah. All right. Whenever you're ready.
It's all relative.
So do you.
Okay, thanks. So this place is very popular with the public. We are at the entryway of South Florida here at Blowing Rocks Preserve. So we're right on the Palm Beach County, Martin County line. So if you drive north up into Martin County, you'll notice it's a little bit more sporadically populated. And as soon as you start driving into Palm Beach County, you will notice the density of people that live in this place. And it's a beautiful place, South Florida. We've got the Everglades, we've got the 10,000 Islands, we've got the Florida Keys. South Florida is a wonderful place for people to live, and I understand why we have so many people here. But they come to Blowing Rocks to find a natural sanctuary. This place provides refuge for wildlife, but it also provides refuge for people who need to escape the city and the more developed areas and come and just enjoy nature. And so we have a wonderful ocean shoreline that's like no other in Florida with our Anastasia limestone rock ridge. We've got excellent snorkeling, and there are a lot of fishing opportunities as well. If you go out onto our Indian River Lagoon shoreline, you can go paddle boarding and kayaking. You can see manatees. So there's a lot of opportunities to view wildlife, but just natural beauty as well. It's very green here. We have a lot of subtropical trees that flourish and biodiversity. So you will always, when you come here, expect to see something, whether it's a beautiful butterfly or a beautiful wildflower or some type of wading bird out in the mangroves.
That's awesome. Let's talk about coastal resilience for a second, and how this is, in a way, a living laboratory for TNC to learn about coastal resilience.
Absolutely. So when we have more frequent king tides and we have bigger, stronger storms and hurricanes, and we see the impacts of sea level rise on our natural communities, this place is one where we can study those impacts and what happens to the natural communities. And so it's an interesting place to bring science and research here as well.
That's awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention that I didn't ask? Oh yeah, well, it's a little bit
Yeah.
related. Can we talk about climate change and the impacts of that on a place like this? Or even around Florida and how they compare?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think of what to touch on with climate change specifically.
If it's something you and all these questions, if you don't feel
yeah.
comfortable, you can be like, pass, not
Yeah,
my-
I mean, I have some things I'd want to say, but like, I feel like maybe let somebody else answer those.
Okay,
I don't
we can let
want to. I
somebody
don't want
else
to screw it up.
answer that. Yeah.
So,
Well,
I mean, I think just from a climate change perspective, we see greater storms events. We see rising tides. We see species compositions changing. We see more vigorous invasive species taking over in some of our natural areas. There's a lot more vigor. They're able to handle the conditions of the changing climate a lot better than a lot of our native species. So this is really a living laboratory for science and research, and for people to come and study what is happening here on our beach and our preserve. Oh, thanks.
is there anything else that you want to mention I didn't ask?
Do you want me to get into species or anything like that? Sea
That would be
turtles?
awesome. Yeah, like what is? I mean, we kind of talked about it a little
She's
bit.
a sea turtle expert.
Okay, not super expert, but okay. Are you ready?
Yeah. I
Okay.
think we're set.
So Blowing Rocks Preserve does have a unique program. It's called our Sea Turtle Rescue Program, and it's really run by volunteers and by our staff and our SCA intern, our Student Conservation Association intern. And this program is unique to us because of our Anastasia limestone rock ridge. So this rock ridge has been here for thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. And sea turtles theoretically would get stuck sometimes in the rocky crevices of this ridge as they come up to the beach to nest. And thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, if a turtle was to get stuck in our ridge, theoretically most of the beaches around us would have still provided great habitat, so it wouldn't be as big of an impact to our sea turtle population. But because sea turtles are endangered, they're federally endangered species, they have very few left in the wild, in the ocean, and the species that do come here really depend on South Florida's beaches, in particular for loggerhead sea turtles, to successfully nest and to produce hatchlings that are viable that go back out into the ocean. So when sea turtles get stuck in our rock ridge, we have volunteers during sea turtle nesting season who walk up and down the beach every single morning, and they look in the rocks and on the beach for any turtles that may have gotten stuck. And every year we get between 0 and about 5 large female healthy nesting turtles that get stuck and need our assistance. And so this program includes different things like sea turtle stretchers and a trailer and other equipment, but really manpower to get these turtles back out into the ocean as long as they're healthy and not in need of rehabilitation. We work very closely with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to implement this program, and we do have a Florida marine turtle permit to provide that service for sea turtles. We are an extremely densely nested beach by sea turtles. On our beach, excuse me, sorry, I got tongue-tied. On our beach, we have 1 mile of shoreline, and it's a nice shoreline, but a lot of it is rocky. And for this island, we get an extreme amount of sea turtle nesting, for much of it being not nestable because of that rock ridge. And so each year we get a little less than 1,000 loggerhead sea turtles that will come here onto this beach to nest. We'll get usually a few hundred green sea turtles, sometimes less depending on the year because it fluctuates. And then we also get leatherback sea turtles, which are great big sea turtles that can get up to over 1,000 pounds. And they come up in early February through spring to do their nesting. And they're magnificent creatures, but they really depend on this place. And because we are a sanctuary and we have limited hours here for the public, they're able to come and do all of their activity before people even come here. And so they're able to complete that part of their life cycle naturally.
We talk about there's also the osprey nest out that way as well.
Absolutely. So we also get shorebirds and wading birds and songbirds. Some of them are residents, others that are migratory. And one great aspect of the restoration that we completed here was that a lot of those Australian pines, those invasive trees that were removed, some of them we actually chose to leave the standing dead tree in place in the restoration to provide habitat for all sorts of different creatures, different bugs and insects, woodpeckers that may need a nice large dead tree. But the other species that decided to take advantage of these big standing dead trees are the osprey. And so each winter we get about 2 pairs of osprey that will nest on our lagoon shoreline in our standing dead Australian pine trees. This year we only have 1 pair, but we're monitoring it with our SCA intern, our Student Conservation Association intern, and we're monitoring to see how many chicks may fledge and to see what habitat that dead standing tree is providing for ospreys.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Are there any other species we should maybe touch on? I don't know. We won't have footage of it, but I feel like bobcats are a big deal.
We get bobcats here. We get a variety of different butterflies. We have a host plant for a Marshall scrub hair streak, which is a rare butterfly, and this is the northernmost point in its range here at Blowing Rocks, where we have the host plant, and we monitor for these butterflies on that host plant, and every year they're there. And so we get wonderful butterfly diversity. We also get an enormous amount of songbirds. There are palm warblers and vireos, all sorts of different songbirds that you'll see here in the winter. We get wonderful shorebirds. Least terns visit here in the spring through the summer to do their nesting. They have not successfully nested here yet at Blowing Rocks, but I have my hopes up. We work with the Florida Shorebird Alliance to monitor for shorebirds here. And they have nested on the island, but it's been somewhat unsuccessful. So we're trying to figure out what we can do to accommodate the least terns because they are a species of concern for the state. And we also get other types of shorebirds that will winter here, such as the black-bellied plover. We get ruddy turnstones and sanderlings. We get a wide variety of sandpipers. It's a wonderful place for birds and sea turtles. And we also get gopher tortoises, which are, we don't have a ton of I'm sorry, just touched my face. We don't have a lot of gopher tortoises here on the preserve, but in our coastal strand and our coastal scrub, we do get some gopher tortoises, which are a land tortoise that burrow underground. And they can burrow maybe 10 feet underground and provide kind of a bed and breakfast for a variety of other species. There are different types of mice and snakes and other wildlife that will utilize the gopher tortoise's burrow. So we do have those here. We also have some non-venomous snakes that you'll see around. We get red rot snakes and black racers. I've seen coach whips here, which are a large brown and black snake. They're very beautiful. I do love the plants that we have here. We get wonderful wildflowers in the spring and summer and grasses in the fall. And in the springtime, a lot of our subtropical trees are flowering and producing fruit as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We'll wait for a horn. I'm kind of out of questions. Do you guys have anything else you want to ask? Or
I was just curious, this occurred to me yesterday, but
Huge reason. I don't know if it's the only reason because I don't know if it's been studied, but the fact that we do have zero light pollution emitting from our beach, and the fact that we have not just a thin strand of sandy beach like much of developed Florida has, we have a beach that is continuously changing. It's a dynamic ecosystem. So sand moves and it changes. Sometimes we have a lot of dune building going on, and other times we have a lot of dune erosion going on, depending on the conditions of the sea. There's an extreme amount of wave energy that is absorbed by that rock ridge out there. And so the habitats that are behind the dune, we've got our maritime hammock, we've got our coastal strand, and then our maritime hammock. And then transitioning all the way out to the lagoon, it really is an oasis. The entire, from east to west, this island is providing habitat for a matrix of species. And for sea turtles, that means they have a lot of privacy, but they also have a lot of beach. We don't have a thin strip of beach that it needs to be renourished each year. We have a very robust beach that is constantly changing, but provides a lot of habitat for nesting sea turtles.
awesome.
Cool.
Anything else, guys?
no,
I think I'm good.
that's it.
Whew.
All right.
Okay.
Rachel, thank you so much.